I've kind of wanted to make a video like this for a while now. I just wasn't really sure how to go about it. It can be difficult a lot of the time to talk about mental health and have these conversations. So I'm gonna try my best. I'm gonna try and keep this video fairly short because I ramble. So yeah. Hi, I'm Allison and I have ADHD. First of all, what exactly is ADHD? ADHD, or Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, is a neurodevelopmental or behavioral disorder, not a learning disorder. It doesn't just affect your ability to learn, it has an impact on every single area of your life. ADHD is kind of a spectrum disorder. It used to be separated into two different types: ADD, Attention Deficit Disorder, and ADHD, Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. The classification has since changed and been updated, and it is now all categorized under the one blanket term of ADHD, but there are three different subtypes. Subtype 1, primarily inattentive, formerly known as ADD, which is what I have. The second type is primarily hyperactive, which is actually the more rare of the three. And the third one is a combination of the first two, kind of a mishmash. And that one I believe is the most common. So yeah, that's just a quick overview of what ADHD is. It was believed for a long time that children would outgrow their symptoms when they became teenagers and then reached adulthood. We now know that is not the case. Roughly 60% of individuals who have been diagnosed with ADHD retain some of their symptoms into adulthood. I was diagnosed with ADD, it was known as, at the time, when I was 7 years old, I think. However old you are in second grade, that's when I was officially diagnosed. At the time, as a 7-year-old, it was very confusing for me because I had just been living my life as like a normal kid, and now all of a sudden there's these doctors telling me that I have this disorder, that I'm not normal like all the other kids. At the time, I didn't realize it, but that impacted me greatly because while I was growing up, I didn't really have many friends. I found it very difficult to make friends. I was not gifted academically, so I was a kind of a pain in school. And I guess because of my ADHD, I acted differently than the other kids, and they noticed, and I was picked on quite a lot because of that. So when I was diagnosed with this disorder, looking back on it now, I guess I kind of felt like I really was an outcast. Like there really was something wrong with me, and that's why nobody liked me. Man, a lot of this stuff is a lot easier to say when a camera's not rolling in front of you. Yeah, so I was officially given my diagnosis. For a long time, I wasn't put on any kind of medication. I think at the time, the only medication that was available for me was Ritalin, and my mother chose not to put me on that. She instead decided to have me take fish oil. I guess she'd read up on it a bit, and I guess fish oils like omega-3s, which are very healthy for you, can help the brain of someone with ADHD kind of develop better. I'm not sure on the science of that. But that's what happened. For quite a few years, basically all throughout the rest of my elementary school years, except for the last couple maybe, I was taking something called FLX, which is just, it's a fish oil supplement. And that was really annoying for me, especially as a kid, taking these big, they probably weren't this big, really, like they were probably about that big, but as like a 7 or 8 year old starting to take these, they looked huge, they looked that big, and it was really hard for me to be treated differently than everyone else. It had quite the impact on my learning. The teachers that I had at the time, I don't think really, they'd never had a student with ADHD, I think. Not one that had been officially diagnosed anyways, so they weren't really sure what to do with me. I remember a little list. The teacher that I had at the time, every single day would print out a schedule, especially for me, only for me, and she would scotch tape it to the top of my desk for everyone to see. This was, I guess, so that I could stay on track and I would be able to stay organized better, and be able to prioritize my time. I don't remember whether or not it worked, but what it did do, it was a very obvious physical representation of how I was different from all of the other kids in the class. So it singled me out more. It made me more of a weirdo than I already was in their eyes. Not all of my teachers would do this, by the way. There were a couple really good teachers that I had when we would have like quizzes and little tests in class. I remember my desk being moved out into the hallway. This was apparently so that I could focus, because it would be more quiet in the hallway. Again, I can't remember if that actually worked, but I do remember the feeling of isolation that it gave me, and I remember the looks on the other kids' faces when my desk would be scraped across like the linoleum floor of the classroom and dragged out into the hallway, because I was different. I needed to be separated from everyone else because there was something wrong with me. That's how it made me feel. I'm sure the teachers meant well, but that's kind of how it made me feel, and it's not a nice feeling. As a result of a lot of this, I was picked on a lot. I think I stopped taking FLX for a couple years, around grade 7 and 8 probably. The real interesting part was when I started high school. Starting high school in the 9th grade was like, it was a horrible time for me. A lot of that summer, right before starting, like transitioning into high school, I would have anxiety attacks. I didn't know that's what they were at the time. I would just find myself getting short of breath and like crying at night, because I would just have all these thoughts going around and around and around and around and around in my head, and I would be so terrified that I would be treated the same way in high school by the kids. Like, I would be bullied and be given a hard time in high school, just like I had been treated and been bullied in elementary school. And I just remember thinking to myself, I don't know if I can survive 4 more years of that. But I started high school. It didn't go well. In the 9th grade, I'm not sure exactly when, like what month, whether it was like the summer previous to starting high school, or if it was sometime in the middle of 9th grade, but I do remember that it was sometime in 9th grade that I was sent to a new psychiatrist? Anyway, I was sent to a brain doctor. Yeah, psychiatrist. They're the ones that can prescribe things. I was sent to a psychiatrist, and she made the decision to prescribe me something called Dexedrine. And For those of you who are not aware of what dexedrine is, the generic name for dexedrine is dextroamphetamine sulfate. It is a very close cousin to another kind of amphetamine known as methamphetamine. So basically, what I was being prescribed as a child was a legalized form of speed. I'm not a fan of that as an adult. I'm really not a fan of that. I understand why it's prescribed, and I understand that it can have really good results. And I know that it's also under the careful supervision of a medical professional. Don't get me wrong. I believe that if somebody needs to be on medication, then they should be on that medication because that's what's going to help them. It's just the idea of children being given a highly addictive stimulant drug, like as an adult, thinking back on it now, it makes me feel uncomfortable. So I was on dexedrine for probably a couple years. I wasn't on it for very long. I hated every second of it, but I continued to take it, number one, because my mom told me I had to, and number two, because one of the lovely side effects of dexedrine is weight loss. And that's like the only reason I continue to take it, because what dexedrine as a stimulant does is it not only takes away your appetite, but it also speeds up your metabolism. And I've always been kind of a chunky girl. So I started to lose weight, and I remember buying a pair of capri pants and seeing the number, like the size on the pants, and it was a size 8. I have been a hard size 16 for like the last, I don't know how many years. I can't remember. Like, the fact that I was ever a size 8, just, it's inconceivable to me.
Inconceivable!
But I was, for a very short period of time, for the end of the 9th grade and all of that following summer, in between 9th and 10th grade, I was as skinny as I've ever been. That was like one of the best summers of my life. I don't think that now, looking back on it now, it makes me kind of sad. Then 10th grade started, and for whatever reason, I went to the psychiatrist again to get my prescription refilled, and the psychiatrist basically said that she wasn't going to continue prescribing me dexedrine because she didn't feel I needed it. I would tend to agree. Personally, I didn't like how dexedrine made me feel. It made me feel jittery. It made me hyper-focus on things so badly that I wouldn't eat, I wouldn't go to the bathroom, I wouldn't move from my chair for an entire day. Like, from when the sun went up to the sun went down, I would just remain so hyper-focused. And not like the normal ADHD kind of hyper-focus. I'm talking like there was this drive within me, almost a compulsive need to keep doing what I was doing. I hated the way that made me feel. I felt like I was doing this all the time, my entire body. I felt like I was vibrating. I lost a lot of sleep. It completely screwed up my sleep. Again, the only reason I continued to take it and not complain about it was because it made me lose weight. So when this doctor decided to stop prescribing dexedrine to me, it was a bittersweet moment for me. I was pretty disappointed because that meant that I would gain all the weight back, which I did, but it also meant that if the doctor thought that my symptoms weren't bad enough to need medication, that meant I was normal, and that I didn't need to be treated differently from everyone else anymore. I didn't need more strict guidelines because there was nothing wrong with me. The doctor said so. Because that meant I had outgrown it. That was not the case. I obviously, I clearly still have it, which I was in denial about for the longest time. Let me explain a little bit about that. I was so happy that that meant that I was normal, because my entire life, ADHD was such a negative thing for me. There was nothing good to me, from my perspective and from, my experience growing up with ADHD. It wasn't a good thing to have. It made me different. It made me act weird. It made me say dumb things. It made me bad at school. It resulted in me getting punished a lot because I would act out. I had impulse control issues, so sometimes I would just do disobedient things and say disobedient things that I didn't necessarily mean. I just couldn't stop myself from saying them or doing them quick enough, so I would get punished a lot. So I had never wanted ADHD. It was kind of like a giant sigh of relief. ADHD was such a negative thing for me, so I would deny that I had it. After the doctor made the decision to stop prescribing Dexedrine, I denied it for a long time. No, I don't have ADHD. I outgrew it. I don't have it anymore. But over the last couple years, I've been learning a little bit more and more and more about ADHD, and I've been slowly realizing how much of an effect it still has on my life. The way that I react to certain situations and process information makes so much more sense to me now, because I don't process information like other people. I don't. And I always, I thought there was something wrong with me. ADHD has still been affecting my life. It's still something I have. I just didn't want to admit it for a long time. But it continued to have an impact on my life. It still does to this day. I don't process information like other people do. It affects my working memory, which is a common symptom in adult ADHD. Means my short-term memory, very bad. Very bad. But I very rarely forget things. I have trouble focusing a lot. I have a tendency to interrupt people when they're talking, and I always feel bad every time, because it infuriates me when people interrupt me, and I know that's because if I don't stay on track with what I'm saying, I'm gonna forget what I was saying. But it always makes me feel guilty when I interrupt people, because I know how much I hate it when people interrupt me. So I try really hard not to do that, and that stresses me out. It's nobody's fault, but that's just the way it is. I have trouble prioritizing when a lot of things will be happening all at once. It'll be bam, 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 and there's so many things my brain is trying to remember, because so many things are happening at once, and all of those things that I'm trying to remember are going around and around and around and around and around in my head, and when that happens, I just freeze and I can't do anything. And I need time to breathe and to sort through things one by one in my head and get them organized very slowly and calmly. Sometimes it's impossible for me to do that, which gives me a lot of anxiety, because when that happens, I'm not as productive as I would like to be, and that makes me feel bad. I feel like a failure, because I can't seem to do what should be easy for me to do. So I get pretty down on myself. Personal relationships are very difficult for me, not just because of ADD, but because I'm me. So yeah, because I was in denial about my ADHD for so many years, I refused to believe that I had it because the doctor said I didn't need meds anymore. That means I'm normal. That means that my disorder was going unmanaged and unchecked for many years, and I think that caused a lot of frustration, and that paired with a lot of other situations that were happening in my life, it resulted in a lot of anxiety and depression. I had really negative thoughts about myself. There were a lot of really bad days, and that's pretty common for people who with ADHD who are either never diagnosed or it goes untreated or unmanaged. For those people, anxiety, depression, and harmful behaviors like eating disorders are pretty common secondary conditions that can develop as a result of difficulties with ADHD symptoms. So yeah, and those are all things that I still struggle with till this day. Some days are really great, and some days are not so great. But I try to give myself a break because my ADHD is not my fault. And I have to keep telling myself that. And giving myself a bit of a break. At least trying to. Because I'm different. And I'm slowly learning to accept that. All the ways in which I'm different. It's a process. It's something that needs to happen if I want to be a little healthier. So yeah, there it is. That's a little bit about me and some of my experiences growing up with ADHD and how it's kind of impacted my mental health through my life. In closing, I just want to say that this is kind of a crazy time. There are a lot more people who are struggling with their mental health. A lot of people are feeling alone right now. Trust me, I know what that's like. I would just like to let you know that it's gonna be okay. And if you feel like things are a little too much for you right now, I would encourage you to try and find the courage to talk to someone. It doesn't necessarily have to be a therapist or a psychiatrist. Just someone you trust. An aunt, an uncle, a teacher, a coworker, maybe. Start there. And if you feel like somebody else in your life is struggling, I would encourage you to reach out to them. You have no idea what an impact you can have on someone's life just by starting that conversation with them. Just by being kind and letting them know you care. It can make such a huge difference in a person's life. So, that's it for me. Hopefully this video made some sort of sense. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.